Designing and developing any game on its own is hard enough, but designing a game with the intention to continually update it for years after launch is a whole other story. Generally, we refer to these kinds of games as live service games. Think GTA Online, Destiny 2, World of Warcraft, etc. Our topic today, Sea of Thieves, is a shining example of how to create and maintain a game in the live service genre that other developers should take notes on when creating their own games. Now, Sea of Thieves is not a perfect game by any means, and we'll get into that later on. But first, we're going over all the things Sea of Thieves does well. Sea of Thieves, developed by Rare and released in March 2018, was initially met with mixed reviews as, despite the stunning visuals and initially thrilling gameplay, players quickly ran out of things to do as the core gameplay loop became repetitive pretty quickly. With only a limited number of voyage types available from 3 trading companies, and already having everything you need unlocked, players and critics definitely noticed a lack of meaningful progression in the game. Rare likely knew this would be the case and quickly got to work with updates. In 2018, there were 4 major content updates and 5 smaller Bilge-Rat adventure updates, which are like smaller story-based content updates, which added new items, cosmetics for pirates and ships, enemies, mechanics, world locations, and limited-time story events. Notable additions include skeleton ships, the Kraken, Megalodons, the Devil's Roar, and my personal favorite addition of the game, the Drum. In 2019, there were 8 major content updates adding more of everything, notably the Arena, a new game mode, which is no longer in the game, but that's another story, a new trading company, more voyages and loot types, pets, and more ways to damage ships, such as destroying the masts to immobilize them. I won't bore you all by extensively going through updates from 2020 to 2023, but TLDR, Rare does more of what they did in the first 2 years post-launch, adding hours upon hours of new content for players to experience. The point is, despite initially being criticized for a lack of progression and content on launch, Rare set themselves up for success by launching Sea of Thieves with a very solid foundation to be able to easily build on throughout the years. The base game mechanics and voyages, which at launch were considered to be a bit repetitive and boring after a while, are now used as a tool to help players learn the ropes before they dive into the more complex content available in the game today. Furthermore, on launch, Sea of Thieves was, and still is, a remarkable sandbox for storytelling and adventures. Every time you hop on to play Sea of Thieves, it's a new adventure in which funny, crazy, and exciting things can and will happen, which you can then go and reminisce about with your friends, whether or not they were there with you, as if you really are a pirate, reciting your tales of adventure in the tavern after a long day. On top of this, Rare is easily able to add various adventures and tall tales which use the Sea of Thieves world to present a rich story experience to players, as well as do crossover story campaigns as they did with Pirates of the Caribbean and the Monkey Island franchise. The best part of all this is that the player can choose to ignore every story element entirely and still have a great time making their own story, much like in the Souls-like genre, which, to be honest, I'm not too familiar with, but I digress. Another way to describe it would be that Sea of Thieves is an engine for storytelling, like how Unreal is the game engine for Sea of Thieves. A bit of a weird analogy, but it gets the point across, hopefully. Moving on, let's discuss Rare's monetization strategy, which has kept the Sea of Thieves ship afloat for the past 5 years. The Plunder Pass, Ancient Coins, and the Pirate Emporium.
I love money!
Essentially, Rare monetizes Sea of Thieves in 2 main ways, beyond purchasing the game itself. The first being the Plunder Pass, their name for a Battle Pass which is very similar to Battle Passes seen in other live service games, such as Fortnite or even Rocket League. However, the Plunder Pass differs from other Battle Passes in that the ratio of free to paid tier unlocks is flipped, with the majority of the unlocks on the track being free, which is refreshing to see in a sea of Battle Passes which lock most of their unlockable items and cosmetics behind the paid tier. The second monetization strategy Rare uses is a premium currency, Ancient Coins, which also refreshingly is only mainly acquired by purchasing it with real money. Again, unlike most other live service games, Ancient coins can also be acquired in-game, mainly by defeating ancient skeletons. What this means is that everything in Sea of Thieves can be acquired without spending any real money, and as mentioned earlier, is only cosmetic. Everything you need to enjoy the game is given to you for free when you first launch the game. Rare deserves more credit for prioritizing making a game that players will enjoy over trying to squeeze every last penny out of them through excessive microtransactions or pay-to-win monetization models. Some may argue that Sea of Thieves does have excessive microtransactions, but when 100% of the items available for purchase are purely cosmetic, it's pretty easy for players to avoid microtransactions if they so choose. Now, of course, I did say Sea of Thieves isn't a perfect game, and it's time to mention some of its shortcomings. The most obvious flaw with Sea of Thieves, which has been discussed extensively elsewhere, such as in Mental Checkpoint's video on button prompts, which I'll link to now and in the description, is of course the controls, and especially the interaction wheel. The Mental Checkpoint video goes into great detail about all the various issues with the controls and potential solutions, so if you want to know more, check that out, it's a great video. The other biggest issue that comes to mind that a lot of people have with Sea of Thieves is the human element. It's not an issue for me personally, but I think it's worth mentioning. By nature of being a multiplayer game with PvP options available, there's always going to be issues of trolls, cheaters, or people just being annoyingly better at the game than you. This is something that is always going to be present in Sea of Thieves, and it's up to you, the consumer, to decide if that's something you want to deal with or not. Rare did recently add a Safer Seas mode to the game, which puts you in a private server containing only you and your crew, no other players, but it's not really intended to be a main game mode and more of a learn the ropes before moving on to the main game type of mode, as made obvious by the 70% reduction in gold and reputation gain, as well as many features being limited or blocked entirely. In any case, there's probably some other issues of varying severity that I've missed and will be reminded of in the comments, but the ones I listed are the most obvious ones, and they definitely don't stop Sea of Thieves from being a phenomenal game, which for me has been worth every penny. Originally, I had planned to conclude and wrap up the video at this point, but there's one more thing I wanted to touch on for those of you who haven't played Sea of Thieves and are considering purchasing it. As mentioned before, within the main game mode of Sea of Thieves, you are likely going to encounter other players, some of which will want to sink your ship and steal all the loot you just spent the past several hours collecting. I'm planning to expand more on the idea of how to make losing fun and losing in video games in another video, but I wanted to talk about it a bit with regards to Sea of Thieves. Let me share a comment from Ninth Shadow on Reddit, responding to a question about complaints about the risk element of Sea of Thieves. Target audience-wise, you've got bright, colorful graphics, a lot of talk of adventure, and sailing with friends. Modern games have generally trained people to leap to conclusions, either that the game is like Safer Seas, or that PvP is something you turn on and only do when you're good and ready. It drives a dagger right into some primal part of us to lose, more specifically to lose unfairly. Virtually no organic fight on the high seas doesn't strike that nerve, especially when you're newer. Their ship is always bigger, or they are so much more experienced. They got a lucky shot that broke the wheel and killed your best player on cannons. You were hauling treasure or had a blind spot, and they got the first salvo on you. You may notice I'm listing a lot of factors, because there are. Sea of Thieves is a chaotic jumble of so many things. Sea of Thieves players love this. It's different every time we set sail. But not everyone knows this. They're wondering why they can't seem to land a single cannonball today. Why they played for 3 days with no problems at all. Now this session they lost 4 hours worth of loot to a ship that were their allies, or so they claimed. You play 10 hours of the latest arena shooter. You may play poorly, but the results are predictable. 10 hours into Sea of Thieves, you're finally feeling like you're holding your own. Then the entire front of your ship explodes. Oh yeah, kegs can spawn in the water, or they swam over one, says the average player, like this revelation is no big deal. People are comfortable with routine. Sea of Thieves loves nothing more than to disrupt whatever you had planned today. I think Ninth Shadow illustrates the point pretty well. Sea of Thieves is a game where it's about the journey, not the destination, and the risk of losing everything is a major factor that makes it fun. If that sounds like something you wouldn't enjoy, that's perfectly fine, I get it, but if you're on the fence about buying the game, give it a shot. You won't regret it. In essence, despite being a bit flawed on launch and still having a few flaws today, Sea of Thieves is an exemplary example of a live service game which deserves a lot more credit than it's received. It's not to say that Sea of Thieves isn't being praised now or hasn't been praised in the past. It's just that the game has had a lot less attention from the general gaming community as a whole since its initial release and the years since then. Although I haven't played Sea of Thieves nearly as much as I've wanted to over the years, I do really love this game and wanted to share this love with all of you. So thank you for watching all the way through, and if you have any games that you love you think deserve more attention, let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching again. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, share, comment, any other YouTube engagement things that people say, and I'll see you next time.